Here's something Chevrolet never wanted the competition to figure out. In 1970, buried inside an ordinary-looking Corvette order form, sat an engine so aggressive, so uncompromising, that when engineers at rival manufacturers finally understood what it actually was, they scrapped entire development programs and started over. That engine was the LT-1. Not the badge you might remember from the 90s. This was the original, the one built in 1970 that turned a showroom sports car into something closer to a factory race weapon. And it did it so quietly that most people who bought a Corvette that year never even knew it existed. Stick with me, because by the end of this video you're going to understand why collectors, engine builders, and automotive historians still argue about how Chevrolet got away with building this thing in the first place. On the surface, 1970 looked like a rough year for Corvette. A UAW strike had delayed production, sales numbers had cratered, and the muscle car magazines were far too busy chasing Hemi Cudas and Boss 429 Mustangs to give a two-seat sports car much attention. But while the rest of Detroit was screaming about cubic inches and drag strip bragging rights, a small group of Chevrolet engineers were quietly finishing something that had almost nothing to do with straight-line speed. It had to do with an engine designed to survive punishment that would destroy anything else on the lot. Here's where it gets interesting. The LT-1 wasn't a big block. It displaced just 350 cubic inches, the same basic architecture as the base Corvette engine sitting right next to it in the same brochure. On paper, that sounds unremarkable. In practice, it was anything but. Chevrolet built the LT-1 around solid lifters instead of the hydraulic lifters used in every other small block Corvette engine that year. That single decision changed everything about how this engine behaved. Solid lifters don't float and lose contact at high RPM the way hydraulic lifters do. They allow an engine to rev harder, hold precision longer, and survive sustained abuse that would cause a normal engine to self-destruct. Chevrolet paired that with an 11:1 compression ratio, an aggressive solid lifter camshaft, and an 850 CFM Holley 4-barrel carburetor with vacuum-controlled secondary throttles that only opened when the engine actually demanded them. The result was an engine rated at 370 horsepower and 380 pound-feet of torque, with a redline that spun all the way to 6,500 RPM. To put that in perspective, most performance engines of that era were begging for mercy well before that number. This one was just getting warmed up. But raw numbers only tell part of the story, and this is the part almost nobody talks about. Chevrolet didn't sell the LT-1 as a headline feature. There was no giant hood scoop screaming its existence, no aggressive graphics package announcing what was under the hood. The only visual clue was a domed hood with a small LT-1 script outlined in twin stripes, easy to miss if you weren't already looking for it. Chevrolet's own internal documentation from that year actually noted that a fully optioned LT-1 Corvette looked externally almost identical to an ordinary base model sitting right next to it in the same parking lot. Imagine that. One of the most track-capable engines Chevrolet had ever built for public sale, and the company barely advertised it at all. Now here's the turning point in this story, the part that explains why this engine genuinely shocked the industry. The LT-1 wasn't just an engine option. It was the heart of a package called the ZR1, and the ZR1 wasn't built for comfortable Sunday drives. It was built specifically to dominate SCCA-B production road racing, and Chevrolet engineered it with a level of obsession that bordered on irrational. Buyers who checked the ZR1 box got a heavy-duty Muncie M22 close ratio 4-speed transmission, nicknamed the Rock Crusher because of the noise its straight-cut gears made under load. They got a transistorized ignition system that resisted timing scatter at high RPM, years before electronic ignition became mainstream across the industry. They got a special aluminum radiator with its own expansion tank, a steel fan shroud, an aluminum drive shaft to cut rotating weight, a positraction limited slip differential, heavy-duty power brakes with dual-pin front calipers, and a suspension package built around a stiffer front sway bar, a 7-leaf rear spring, heavier shocks, and reinforced rear spindle struts. This wasn't badge engineering. This was a genuine race car wearing a production Corvette badge. And here's the part that will actually make you stop and think. To keep weight down and reduce parasitic load on that engine, Chevrolet refused, on principle, to let buyers combine the ZR1 package with air conditioning, power steering, power windows, a rear defroster, deluxe wheel covers, an alarm system, or even a factory radio. Read that again. This was a two-seat American sports car sold to paying customers in 1970, and Chevrolet deliberately stripped it of basic comfort features in pursuit of lap times. That single decision tells you everything about how serious this engine really was. It wasn't built to be liked. It was built to win. Naturally, that kind of uncompromising engineering came at a steep price, and this is where the story gets almost tragic. The ZR1 package alone added roughly $969 to the car, and ordering the standalone LT-1 engine cost about $448, at a time when a base Corvette coupe already started at $5,192. Combine that cost with a total lack of creature comforts, and you get a brutal reality. Only 25 customers in the entire country checked that box in 1970, out of 17,316 Corvettes built that year. 25 people, in the entire United States, understood what they were actually buying. But here's the twist that changes everything. Those 25 cars are now some of the most valuable small block Corvettes ever produced. Surviving examples sell at auction anywhere from around $130,000, all the way up to a documented $451,000 for the very first ZR1 built, a convertible pilot car that started this entire legend. Think about that gap for a second. An engine option that almost nobody wanted in 1970 is now worth more than most modern supercars, purely because Chevrolet refused to compromise on what it was building, even when it meant scaring away nearly every single customer. Now, if you think the story stops there, stay with me, because this is where it actually connects to the rest of the automotive industry, and why this engine genuinely rattled competitors who eventually found out what Chevrolet had built. While Ford and Chrysler were locked in a public horsepower arms race, screaming about 429 Cobra jets and 426 HEMIS in every magazine ad they could buy, Chevrolet was quietly proving something different. You didn't need the biggest engine to build the most dominant race-capable machine on the grid. You needed precision. Solid lifters that didn't float. Ignition timing that didn't scatter. A drivetrain built specifically to survive sustained abuse lap after lap, rather than a single glorious quarter-mile pull. When competing manufacturers eventually got their hands on ZR1-equipped Corvettes at SCCA events, they weren't just facing a fast car. They were facing an engineering philosophy that most of Detroit hadn't caught up to yet, and in several documented cases, it took rival teams years to figure out exactly why these Corvettes were so difficult to beat on a road course, because the answer wasn't obvious from a spec sheet. It was buried in details like lifter type and ignition design that nobody was paying attention to at the time. And here's something that will genuinely surprise you if you've followed Corvette history for a while. The LT-1 name didn't disappear after 1970. Chevrolet brought it back more than 2 decades later for the 1992 Corvette, using it on a completely different, modernized engine. That's not a coincidence. Chevrolet's own engineers understood exactly what the original LT-1 represented in the company's history, an engine built without compromise, and they deliberately resurrected that name when they wanted the public to associate a new engine with that same uncompromising reputation. Very few engine names in automotive history get retired for over 20 years and then brought back specifically because of the legacy attached to them. The original 1970 LT-1 earned that. If you're wondering whether any of this was an accident, it wasn't. Every decision behind this engine traces back to a very specific engineering philosophy taking hold at Chevrolet in 1970. Rising insurance surcharges on high-horsepower cars were already becoming a serious concern for manufacturers. Emissions regulations were tightening on the horizon, and GM leadership was growing nervous about liability tied to extremely powerful production vehicles reaching ordinary customers. In that environment, most manufacturers were choosing to detune their engines and quietly back away from serious performance. Chevrolet chose the opposite path with the LT-1. Instead of building a bigger engine to chase headlines, they built a smaller, smarter, more precise one, and buried it inside a nearly invisible option code that only the most serious buyers would ever find. That decision alone tells you Chevrolet wasn't just building a fast car in 1970. They were quietly proving a point to the rest of the industry, and daring competitors to notice. So here's the real story of the 1970 Corvette LT-1. It wasn't loud. It wasn't advertised. It didn't come with flashy graphics, or a marketing campaign built around horsepower numbers. It was a solid lifter, high compression, precision-engineered small block hidden inside an unassuming hood, wearing nothing more than a small script badge, sold to 25 people who understood exactly what they were getting, while the rest of the industry spent years trying to catch up to an engineering philosophy Chevrolet had already perfected and mostly kept to itself. That's not a myth. That's not exaggeration. That's a documented engine, with documented specs, documented production numbers, and a documented auction history that proves this small, quiet option was one of the most genuinely shocking pieces of engineering the American auto industry produced that entire decade. Which part of this caught you off guard the most? The fact that only 25 were built, the fact that Chevrolet refused to let buyers add air conditioning, or the fact that this same engine name came back 22 years later? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see the full story of what happened to Corvette performance right after this engine disappeared, tell us down below and we'll cover it next. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like and subscribe for more real automotive history. No myths, no legends, just documented stories that prove the past was wilder than fiction.